Daniel Bennett picked his 55th birthday to tell his wife that 24 years of marriage had become boring. He did not tell her in private. He did not sit down with her at the kitchen table and admit that he wanted out. He waited until they were at the country club, surrounded by friends, co-workers, and family. Then he stood up with a glass in his hand. At first, Laura thought he was going to make a birthday speech. Daniel thanked everyone for coming. He made a joke about getting older. People laughed. Then he looked at Laura. He thanked her for 24 years of stability. For one brief second, she thought he was being sincere. Then he smiled. But stability is not the same as being alive. The room changed. You could feel it. Daniel went on to describe their marriage as safe, predictable, comfortable, and boring. Laura sat there listening, while the man she had spent more than 2 decades building a life with turned their marriage into a story about everything he had supposedly been denied. Then Erica Cole stepped forward. Laura knew her. Not well. She had met her twice through Daniel's work. Daniel reached for Erica's hand. And right there, in front of their 15-year-old daughter, he announced that he had already moved out. His attorney, he said, would be sending divorce papers. Sophie heard every word. Laura looked at her daughter first. That mattered more than Daniel probably ever understood. Sophie had gone completely still. Laura did not scream. She did not throw a drink. She did not ask Erica how long it had been going on. She simply looked at Daniel and said, "Then I hope the life you chose can afford itself." Then she stood up, took Sophie with her, and walked out. 5 months later, Daniel was standing outside Laura's new townhouse. Erica was gone. The confidence was gone, too. He had a DNA result in one hand and was asking Laura to stop the financial discovery before more records came out. Laura did not open the door. If you believe betrayal has a way of leaving evidence behind, subscribe. Because Daniel thought he had planned his escape carefully, he had not planned for the paper trail. 2 years earlier, Laura would have described her marriage as ordinary, and she would have meant that in the best possible way. She and Daniel were not rich. They did not own a vacation home or spend summers overseas. They had a comfortable house in a quiet suburb. The mortgage was finally getting close enough to the finish line that they could talk about it without feeling tired. They had retirement accounts, a college fund for Sophie, 2 decent incomes, a life that had taken years to build. It was not glamorous. It was not supposed to be. For a long time, it was simply theirs. Laura worked in hospital billing. She was good at it because she was patient, careful, and hard to fool when the numbers did not add up. At home, she used those same skills without thinking about them. She remembered when the insurance needed to be renewed. She knew when Sophie had a dental appointment. She kept track of school forms, prescription refills, parent meetings, birthdays, family obligations, and all the small things that nobody notices until someone stops doing them. Daniel used to notice. He used to tell people that Laura was the reason their life ran smoothly. He used to say he would lose his head if she did not remind him where he had put it. Then, somewhere after he turned 50, the same qualities he once praised started becoming complaints. Laura was too careful, too practical, too predictable. If she asked how much a last-minute weekend trip would cost, Daniel said she was ruining the mood. If she wanted to be home Sunday night because Sophie had school the next morning, he accused her of never knowing how to have fun. When Laura turned down a spontaneous trip because her mother needed help recovering from a medical procedure, Daniel acted as if that proved something about her. Something disappointing. He started talking about life as if Laura had been standing in the way of his. And the worst part was that she started to believe him. Laura knew she was not spontaneous. She knew too many evenings had become the same routine. Work, dinner, laundry, bills, sleep. Then start again. She knew romance had slowly been crowded out by responsibility. That happens in long marriages sometimes. People get tired. They get busy. They assume there will always be time later. Laura could admit that. So she tried. She booked a weekend away. She started saying yes to dinners she normally would have skipped. She made an effort to join Daniel when he wanted to go out, even when she was tired. Eventually, she asked him to go to counseling with her. Daniel went 3 times. After that, he refused to go back. Talking won't make you a different person, he told her. Laura carried that sentence around for months, longer than she should have. She started wondering whether 24 years of being dependable had somehow made her undesirable. Whether being the person everyone counted on had turned her into someone nobody wanted. Whether stability really was just another word for dull. That is how gaslighting often works. Not with one giant lie, with repetition. With enough little comments that eventually you start helping the other person blame you. Laura was not perfect. No one is. But a marriage can need attention without deserving betrayal. A person can be unhappy without rewriting 24 years of history to make cheating feel justified. Daniel kept saying he wanted more out of life. What Laura did not know was that he had already started paying for another one. At first, the changes were easy to explain. Daniel traveled more. One overnight business trip turned into several. Then there were conference weekends, client dinners, meetings that somehow ran until almost midnight. Laura tried not to become suspicious. She did not want to be that wife, the one checking every receipt, the one questioning every late night, the one turning every business trip into an accusation. So she trusted him, until the details stopped lining up. One conference Daniel said lasted through Sunday had actually ended Saturday afternoon. A client dinner appeared on a night when the company calendar showed no event. Once, he said he had stayed near the airport because an early flight made driving home pointless. Later, Laura realized the flight had not been until noon. Whenever she asked, Daniel had an answer. Always. Too quickly sometimes. But there was always an answer. Then the money began to change. Daniel told Laura he was having one of his strongest sales years in a long time. Good clients, strong commissions, a good quarter, but the deposits going into their joint account were getting smaller. Laura noticed because noticing numbers was what she did for a living. She asked him about it one evening. Daniel barely looked away from his phone. Commissions changed. That was it. No explanation. No details. Just 2 words. When Laura asked again a week later, the conversation somehow became about her. She worried too much. She was obsessed with money. She treated their marriage like an accounting department. Daniel had become very good at that. Laura could ask a simple question about his behavior, and 10 minutes later, she would find herself defending her personality. Around the same time, Erica Cole started appearing more often in Daniel's stories. Laura had met Erica twice, once at a company dinner, once at a charity event. Daniel introduced her as a consultant who was helping expand into a new market. Erica had been friendly, polished, easy to talk to. Nothing about her seemed threatening. And maybe that was why Laura ignored the uncomfortable feelings she got whenever Daniel mentioned her name. There was no dramatic lipstick on a collar, no love letter left in a pocket, nothing obvious. Just small things. And small things are easy to dismiss when you have spent 24 years trusting someone. Then Daniel started missing things with Sophie. A school presentation, a Saturday they had planned together, a medical appointment he had promised he would attend. Laura covered for him more times than she could count. She told Sophie her father was busy. She moved schedules around. She made excuses so her daughter would not feel forgotten. Then, when Laura finally pointed out the pattern, Daniel accused her of trying to turn Sophie against him. That one surprised her. Laura had never asked Sophie to choose sides. There were no sides yet. At least, not that Laura knew about. Then Daniel began asking questions that did not make sense at the time. What time did Sophie usually get home from school? How often did Laura have to work late? How much did apartments cost near the high school? And more than once, Daniel casually mentioned that if parents ever separated, 50-50 custody was only fair. They had never discussed separation. Not seriously. Laura noticed that. She just did not understand why it mattered. Then one afternoon, while she was at work, her phone buzzed with a bank alert. $1,275. Northfield Child Development Center. Laura read the name twice. Sophie was 15 years old. She had not needed childcare in years. That evening, Laura waited until after dinner. She showed Daniel the charge. He barely reacted. Business reimbursement. Accounting will fix it. He said it so easily that Laura almost felt embarrassed for asking. So she let it go. For nearly 2 months. Then the same payment appeared again. Same amount. Same place. That was the moment the feeling changed. Laura had spent her entire adult life trusting patterns that made sense. This one did not. And once you notice a pattern that should not exist, it becomes very hard to unsee it. She did not accuse Daniel. She did not call Erica. She did not start searching through things that were not hers. She simply stopped believing that every explanation deserved automatic trust. For the first time, Laura stopped asking questions Daniel could answer with another lie. Then came the birthday dinner, the country club, the speech, Erica's hand in Daniel's, Sophie crying quietly in the passenger seat while Laura drove them home. Neither of them spoke much. Laura wanted to say something comforting, something a mother is supposed to say when her daughter has just watched her family break apart in public. But there was nothing honest she could offer. Daniel did not come home that night. The next morning, Laura received a message. My attorney will handle the rest. She read it twice. No apology. No explanation. Just a legal wall placed where a marriage had been. Laura put her phone down. Then she called an attorney of her own. The first thing the attorney told her was to slow down. Do not delete anything. Do not destroy records. Do not access accounts that were not legally hers. Save statements from joint accounts she already had lawful access to. And do not sign any refinance, loan, or document involving the house until someone had reviewed it. For the first time in months, Laura stopped trying to understand Daniel emotionally. She stopped wondering what she had done wrong. She started looking at what was actually there. The childcare payment was not a mistake. There had been more than 2. Same center, similar amounts, a regular pattern. When Laura went back through the statements she already had access to, she found payments going back more than 2 years. She sat at the kitchen table with printed pages spread in front of her. For a long time, she just stared at them. Then, she got a notebook. She started making a list. Dates, amounts, names. She did not know what the full story was yet. But she knew Daniel's explanation had been false. Then she found another charge. This one was much smaller. $86.40. Metrogen Paternity Services. Laura read the description once. Then again. Daniel had never mentioned a DNA test. Not once. She felt the old instinct come rushing back. Call him. Demand an answer. Ask him who the child was. Ask Erica what she knew. Force someone to tell the truth. Laura did none of it. She scanned the records, sent them to her attorney, and waited. 3 days later, Daniel emailed her a document involving the home equity. He wrote as if the last week had never happened, as if he had not humiliated her in front of their daughter, as if he had not announced another woman to a room full of people. It's just paperwork. We already discussed it. Laura did not remember discussing it. Her answer was simple. Send it to my attorney. Daniel called almost immediately. Laura let it ring. Then he called again. When she finally answered, his voice was already sharp. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Laura stayed quiet for a second. Then she said, No, I'm making sure I understand what I'm signing. That was the first time she heard it. Not anger. Not arrogance. Worry. Daniel's plan needed more than Erica. More than a new apartment. More than divorce papers. It needed money. It needed equity from the house. It needed access to credit. And, more than Daniel wanted to admit, it still needed Laura to cooperate the way she always had. Laura did not freeze his accounts. She did not take his money. She did not do anything dramatic. She simply stopped helping him finance a life she had never been told existed. And almost immediately, the pressure began to show. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes, it is what happens when a person finally stops arguing with the lie and starts looking at the evidence underneath it. Daniel filed first. The papers arrived with a version of the marriage Laura barely recognized. According to Daniel, they had been unhappy for years. Laura was controlling, emotionally distant, too focused on money. He claimed they had been living more like roommates than husband and wife. He wanted a clean division of property. He wanted half the equity in the house. He wanted equal parenting time with Sophie. And he claimed his income had dropped because his commissions were no longer what they used to be. On paper, it all sounded calm. Reasonable, even. That was what bothered Laura most. Daniel had taken 24 years of marriage and reduced them to a few clean paragraphs that made him look like a man who had simply reached the end of an unhappy relationship. There was no country club, no birthday speech, no Erica standing beside him, no mention of the childcare payments, no DNA charge, just a tired husband leaving a difficult wife. Laura wanted to answer every sentence. She wanted to write down every school morning Daniel had slept through, every appointment she had handled alone, every time she had moved her work schedule because Sophie was sick, every weekend Daniel had canceled because something more important had come up. She wanted to explain herself. Her attorney told her not to. Don't argue with his version. Document yours. That advice changed everything. Laura bought a plain calendar. Nothing special. No dramatic folder marked evidence. Just a calendar. She started filling it in. School pickups, doctor visits, counseling appointments. Weekends Daniel canceled. Nights he was traveling. Messages she sent about Sophie that went unanswered. Times Daniel asked for extra time and then failed to show up. Laura did not write that Daniel was a bad father. She did not need to. She wrote what happened. Dates. Times. Appointments. Who was there? Who was not? It was a small thing, but it gave her something she had not felt in months. Clarity. The financial records started opening up around the same time. At first, Daniel's business arrangement did not look unusual. Bennett Market Strategies LLC. Laura knew the name. Daniel had mentioned it years earlier and said he used it for occasional consulting work. She had never paid much attention. Why would she? They were married. She trusted him. That trust had done a lot of unpaid work over the years. Now the records began showing what Daniel had never explained. Bonuses that once went into the household account stopped arriving there. Some commissions were routed through the LLC first. Business money was used for expenses that did not look much like business. And one name kept appearing. E. Cole Consulting. Erica. The payments were steady. Regular. And when Laura's attorney looked at the records available through the legal process, there was very little to show what kind of consulting Erica had actually performed. Then the older transactions started coming in. That was when the story changed. Up to that point, Laura knew Daniel had cheated. She knew he had lied. She knew he had moved money. But the older records showed something larger. 31 payments to Northfield Child Development Center. Apartment rent, furniture, pediatric clinic charges, health insurance reimbursements, grocery deliveries to an address Laura did not recognize, monthly transfers. Some were a few $100s. Some were much more. Individually, they could be explained. Together, they could not. They looked less like an affair and more like a second household. Laura sat in her attorney's office with the timeline in front of her. Almost 4 years. That was the part that hurt in a different way. 4 years meant birthdays, Christmases, anniversaries, family dinners, school events. 4 years of Daniel sitting across from Laura while quietly paying for another life. This was not one bad decision. It was a system, and somewhere in the middle of that system was a child. That brought them back to the $86.40 charge. Metrogen Paternity Services. Laura's attorney confirmed that the company provided genetic testing. But Laura did not have the result. She had no legal right to go looking for it on her own. So the question stayed open. Had Daniel taken the test because he wanted proof the child was his? Or because he had doubts? Laura did not know. Daniel did. And for the moment, he still believed that answer was safely buried inside the life he had built with Erica. The custody fight became more difficult before it became clearer. Daniel started asking Sophie to stay overnight at the apartment. He wanted her to meet Erica. He told Sophie she needed to accept that things had changed. Sophie refused. She was 15, old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to remember her father holding another woman's hand while announcing the end of her parents' marriage in front of a room full of people. Laura did not tell Sophie to hate him. She did not show her the financial records. She did not tell her about the childcare center or the DNA charge. She found a counselor instead. She kept Daniel informed about school events. She sent him appointment times. She encouraged Sophie to answer his messages when she felt able. Daniel still accused Laura of turning their daughter against him. That accusation might have worked better if the records had not shown something else. Daniel asked for more time with Sophie, then canceled. He complained that Laura controlled the schedule, then missed the school event because he was away with Erica. He demanded equal parenting time, then disappeared for another business weekend. The calendar did not call him cruel. It did not accuse him of anything. It simply showed a man asking for a version of fatherhood he had not consistently lived. The child support issue followed the same pattern. Daniel said his income had dropped. Laura's attorney asked where the bonuses had gone, why some commissions had moved through the LLC, why business funds appeared to cover personal expenses, why the number Daniel reported did not seem to match the life he had been financing. According to Laura's attorney, in their state, the court could look beyond the number Daniel chose to put on a form if the records showed a different financial reality. Daniel had expected anger. He knew how to deal with anger. He could call Laura emotional. He could say she was bitter. He could tell people she was trying to punish him. What he had not expected was patience. And patience was becoming expensive. Laura stopped paying a credit card in her name that Daniel had continued using. She refused to sign new loan documents. She would not guarantee financing. She would not use her income to keep supporting the home he had left while he spent money maintaining another one. She did not take anything that belonged to him. She just stopped carrying the part of his life he had assumed she would keep carrying. That difference mattered. Erica seemed to notice before Daniel admitted there was a problem. When would the house sell? When would the equity be released? Why was the apartment payment late? Why could Daniel not move money around the way he had before? The future he had promised her was supposed to become easier once he left Laura. Instead, everything got harder. Daniel started calling more often. The first time, he tried to sound mature. "We should handle this like adults," Laura answered. "That's why I hired an attorney." The second time, irritation came through. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Laura said. "I'm asking for accurate records." The third time, he sounded less angry, more cornered. "You're trying to punish me." Laura did not answer right away. Then she said, "No. I'm stopping myself from paying for things I was never told existed." Daniel went quiet. There are arguments people can win by talking long enough. Records are different. A memory can be challenged. A promise can be denied. Someone can say a conversation never happened. But a payment has a date. A transfer has an amount. An account has a balance. By then, Laura knew enough to understand the shape of the betrayal. Daniel had hidden Erica. He had hidden a child. He had hidden years of payments. What Laura still did not know was that the future Daniel had destroyed his marriage for was resting on one assumption. And that assumption was about to collapse. From the outside, Laura's life became almost ordinary again. She went to work. She took Sophie to school. She answered Daniel's messages briefly. She did not expose him online. She did not call his coworkers. She did not spend every dinner telling friends what he had done. Daniel mistook that silence for weakness. He thought Laura would get tired. He thought the cost of lawyers would scare her. He thought the woman he had spent years calling cautious would eventually choose the quickest settlement just to make the discomfort stop. He was wrong. He did not see the meetings with her attorney. He did not see the documents being organized. He did not see the questions being prepared for deposition. He did not see the custody calendar getting fuller. Laura was still living the same steady life Daniel had mocked. She was just no longer using that steadiness to protect him. The pressure reached Erica next. The apartment cost more than Daniel had expected. The house had not sold. The equity was not available. The financial records were being examined. Money that once moved quietly was now being questioned. For years, Daniel had told Erica that once he left Laura, everything would become simple. It did not. The future Daniel had promised began to depend on money he no longer controlled as easily as before. And then the child became an issue again. Erica wanted certainty. Daniel did too. A separate dispute involving support and paternity forced the question into the open. Another DNA test was done. The result arrived without drama. No confession, no shouting match, no moment large enough to match the damage that had already been done. Just a result. Paternity excluded. Daniel was not the father. The child he had helped support for years was not his. The same child whose childcare he had paid, whose medical bills had appeared in the records. The child connected to the apartment, the furniture, the groceries, the monthly transfers. Daniel had spent years moving money, hiding income, and building a second household because he believed he was creating a future with Erica and their child. Except the child was not his. The results shattered the story he had been telling himself. But it did not erase anything else. That was the part Daniel understood too late. The childcare payments still existed. The apartment payments still existed. The transfers to Erica still existed. The money routed through the LLC still existed. The financial forms he had signed still existed. Erica lying to Daniel did not make Daniel honest with Laura. He could not walk into the divorce process, say the child was not his, and expect 4 years of hidden spending to disappear. The case was not about whether Daniel had been made a fool of. It was about what he had done while believing the lie. A few days later, Daniel came to the house. Laura was packing boxes. She had already decided she would not stay there forever. The house had too many memories, too much space, too much history attached to rooms she no longer wanted to preserve, just because Daniel had once assumed the equity would help fund his new life. Daniel stood on the porch. Laura did not invite him in. He looked different. Not broken, not ruined, just older. The confidence from the country club was gone. Erica lied to me, he said. Laura looked at him. That doesn't make you honest. Daniel lowered his eyes. The child isn't mine. Laura's face did not change. The payments were... That stopped him. For a second, he had nothing to say. Then he started talking about settlement. He wanted to finish everything quickly, quietly. He wanted Laura to stop pushing for deeper financial discovery. He wanted the business records left alone. He said they had both been through enough. That word almost made Laura laugh. Both. She did not. Daniel kept talking. He said the situation had become a disaster. He said Erica had deceived him. He said he had made mistakes. Then, finally, he asked Laura to help him stop things from getting worse. Laura listened until he was finished. Then she said, "You wanted our marriage handled by lawyers? I finally agreed with you." And she closed the door. No screaming, no insult, no victory speech. Daniel had been betrayed. That was true. But being betrayed did not erase the people he had betrayed first. The DNA test had destroyed the future he left for. The court still had to deal with the past he had tried to hide. Daniel kept insisting that his income had simply gone down. That was his explanation from the beginning. Commissions were weaker. The market had changed. Business was uncertain. But the records kept making that story harder to maintain. There were bonuses, transfers through the LLC, recurring expenses that did not match the financial picture Daniel had presented. Money moving in ways he had never explained to Laura. The court did not need a dramatic moment. There was no speech from the judge, no sudden confession, no courtroom gasp. Just documents. Laura's attorney laid out the transactions. Daniel's attorney responded. Questions were asked. Statements were compared. And little by little, the version of Daniel's finances that had once looked simple became impossible to keep simple. That was what made the process so effective. Laura did not have to call him a liar. The records did that work for her. The custody issue unfolded the same way. Daniel continued asking for 50-50 parenting time. He said he wanted to be fully involved in Sophie's life. On paper, that sounded good, but the actual schedule told a different story. Laura had handled most school mornings, most doctor visits, most counseling appointments. Most of the ordinary responsibilities that never sound important until a court has to decide what consistency actually looks like. Daniel had missed visits, canceled weekends, traveled, asked for time he later failed to use. Sophie's counselor documented the stress she had been under and the importance of keeping her life stable. In the end, Daniel was not cut out of his daughter's life. Laura never wanted that. Sophie still spent time with her father. But the final arrangement reflected the parenting that had actually been happening, not the version Daniel had written into his filing. Laura remained the parent handling most of Sophie's daily life. Daniel did not get the convenient version of equal custody he had expected. The child support issue changed, too. Once the broader financial picture came into focus,
Daniel did not get the advantage he had hoped for by reporting a lower income.
money does not disappear just because it takes a different route. A commission routed through a business account is still money. A bonus delayed is still a bonus. And expenses paid quietly for years still tell a story. Daniel had spent so much time trying to control the story that he forgot something simple. Numbers do not care how convincing you sound. Then Erica left. There was no spectacular ending, no public scene, no apology to Laura, no moment where Erica suddenly admitted that Laura had been right all along. She simply told Daniel that everything had become too complicated. That was it. The apartment was expensive. The divorce was still going on. The money was being questioned. The DNA result had changed everything between them. The life Daniel had called exciting had turned into rent, legal bills, financial disclosures, custody schedules, and unanswered messages. For years, he had looked at Laura's steady life and called it dull. Now he was learning what instability actually felt like. The first time Daniel asked Laura for help, it was about money. He said he was short on rent. He only needed enough to get through the month. He promised he would pay it back. Laura listened. Then she said no. Not angrily, not cruelly, just no. A few weeks later, he asked if he could stay at the house for a while. Temporarily, he said, just until he found another place. Again, Laura said no. Daniel had already chosen where he wanted to live. Laura was no longer responsible for making that choice comfortable. The third time he came back, he did not ask for money. He sounded tired, older. "We had 24 years, he said. "Doesn't that count for anything?" Laura looked at him for a long moment. Of course it counted. That was the whole point. 24 years counted every time she kept the household moving. Every time she protected Sophie from disappointment. Every time she covered a bill. Every time she believed an explanation that did not deserve to be believed. Every time she trusted him. It counted every day I protected it, she said. Daniel had nothing. That was the last time he asked to come back. Daniel did not lose everything. Real life usually does not work that way. He kept his job. He still had an income. He still had responsibilities. He still had a relationship with Sophie, though it was more fragile than it had been before. There was no complete destruction. No impossible fall from wealth to nothing. Just consequences. And sometimes those are harder to live with, because they do not end quickly. Daniel lost the marriage he had mocked. He lost Erica. He lost the fantasy that he had been building a second family. He lost the financial advantage he thought he had prepared. And he lost the story where he was simply a man escaping a boring wife. By the time the divorce was finished, that story no longer held together. The process itself was quieter than the betrayal had been. Property was divided. Laura's retirement interests were protected according to the settlement. The custody schedule gave Sophie the consistency she needed. The hidden spending was no longer something Laura had to pretend had never happened. She did not walk away with everything. That was never the point. She walked away with what the records and the legal process allowed her to protect. And for Laura, that was enough. Daniel had always assumed the dangerous version of Laura would be the angry one, the one who yelled, the one who cried, the one who lost control. He never understood that the real turning point came when she became calm, when she stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped asking him to tell the truth. stopped rescuing him from the consequences of his own decisions. Once she did that, every choice he had hidden had to stand on its own. Daniel did not fall apart because Laura destroyed him. She never needed to. He had built a life that depended on secrets. And secrets are expensive. One lie needed another lie. One hidden payment required another. One account led to another account. Every transfer created a date. Every expense created a record. Every record waited quietly for someone to finally look at the whole picture. That is usually how real karma works. Not with lightning. Not with some impossible twist. Just the bill arriving after someone has spent years pretending there would never be one. A year later, Daniel sent Laura one final message. It was short. I was wrong about you. Laura read it once, then she deleted it. Not because she hated him. Not because she wanted to punish him. The message simply arrived too late to matter. Daniel had called her boring. Then the house he expected to help finance his new life did not work out the way he planned. The woman he left for was gone. The child he had secretly helped support turned out not to be his. The income he tried to make look smaller followed him into the divorce. The custody arrangement reflected the father he had actually been, not the one he described in legal papers. And every time he came back looking for money, shelter, or another chance, Laura gave him the same answer. No. Never screamed, never thrown in his face. Just final. For 24 years. Laura had made Daniel's life stable enough that he started believing stability had no value. He had confused the absence of chaos with the absence of life. Only after he destroyed that stability did he understand what it had taken to create it. By then, Laura was gone. Not missing. Not waiting. Gone. She had sold the old idea that keeping the house would somehow prove she had won. Instead, she chose a smaller townhouse, something easier to manage, something that felt like hers. The bills were in her name. The accounts were clean. Sophie had her own room. A custody calendar hung on the refrigerator. There was a small balcony where Laura drank coffee in the morning. And there were no business trips she had to question. No unexplained charges. No phone calls that ended with her wondering whether she was imagining things. Sophie slowly became more settled. She still saw her father. Laura never asked her to hate him. She knew Sophie had already lost enough. A child should not have to carry a parent's anger just to prove loyalty. At work, Laura moved into a position with steadier hours and more responsibility. She started walking in the mornings. She took a short road trip she had postponed for years. And slowly, almost without noticing, she began doing things simply because she enjoyed them. No one was there to call her cautious. Predictable. Boring. One morning, Laura sat on the balcony with coffee in her hand. Sophie was still asleep down the hall. Her phone was quiet. The bills were paid. The accounts made sense. There were no hidden transfers. No excuses. No man telling her that loyalty was boring while using her money to finance a lie. And in that silence, Laura finally understood something. Daniel had called her boring because she was the person holding everything together. He had mistaken reliability for weakness, patience for permission, loyalty for something that would always be waiting for him when he came back. He had been wrong about all three. Laura had not won because the DNA test humiliated Daniel. She had not won because Erica left. She had not won because the financial records followed him into court. She won the day she stopped needing his regret to prove that what happened to her was real. That was the freedom Daniel never understood. He had wanted a more exciting life. He got one. Lawyers, DNA results, financial discovery, custody disputes, an apartment he could barely keep, and the knowledge that the woman he had humiliated was finally living better without him. Laura never had to ruin him. She only had to stop protecting him from the consequences. After that, the truth did the rest. And maybe that is the part people forget. Stability is not boring when you are the one paying the bills. Loyalty is not weakness when you are the one holding a family together. And peace is not an empty life. Sometimes peace is what finally returns, after you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable.
If you believe betrayal can hide behind excuses but rarely survives the paper trail, subscribe for more stories about divorce, custody battles, hidden money, and the quiet moment when someone finally takes their power back.